The television courtroom had never witnessed such a moment of pure, unfiltered disrespect from someone so young. 12-year-old Tyler Mason walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with his AirPods Max firmly planted on his ears, his latest iPhone glowing in his hands, and an expression of boredom that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else on planet Earth. His designer sneakers, worth more than some people's monthly car payments, squeaked against the polished floor as he slouched toward the defendant's table without so much as a glance at the elderly woman whose life he had deliberately destroyed for TikTok views. What happened in the next minutes would become the most viral courtroom moment in television history, shared millions of times across every social media platform imaginable, with Judge Judy's response becoming a rallying cry for parents, teachers, and anyone who believed that consequences still mattered in a world where children seemed increasingly untouchable. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Tyler didn't just get a lecture. He didn't just lose the case. What Judge Judy did to this entitled 12-year-old was so devastatingly precise, so righteously furious, and so perfectly calibrated to hit him exactly where it hurt most that it silenced not just Tyler, not just his enabling mother, but the entire courtroom and eventually millions of viewers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The words that came out of Tyler's mouth, the disrespect he showed to a decorated judge with decades of experience, triggered a response that would be studied in parenting classes, shared in teachers' lounges, and referenced in therapy sessions for years to come. Judge Judy didn't simply rule against him. She delivered a masterclass in accountability that would change this kid's entire life trajectory. Before we show you the exact moment when Tyler called Judge Judy a Karen to her face and told her she had boomer energy, you need to understand who these people really were and what brought them to this explosive confrontation. Because this wasn't just about one disrespectful comment or one destroyed garden. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for years, enabled by a mother who was too afraid to be a parent and directed at vulnerable people who represented everything wrong with how Tyler had been allowed to move through the world without ever facing real consequences. Hit that like button right now if you believe kids need to learn respect and that parents need to actually parent instead of trying to be their child's best friend. Subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about Tyler's pattern of behavior will absolutely shock you. And trust me, the next minutes will restore your faith that karma is not only real, but sometimes it wears a judge's robe and has zero patience for entitled behavior. Tyler Mason embodied the perfect storm of modern parenting failures. At 12 years old, he had a TikTok account with thousands of followers built entirely on content that mocked adults, disrespected authority figures, and celebrated getting away with behavior that would have gotten previous generations grounded for months. His single mother, Jennifer Mason, had spent the years since her divorce trying desperately to be the cool parent, the understanding parent, the parent who treated her son like a friend instead of a child who needed boundaries, discipline, and consequences. She worked as a marketing coordinator and earned decent money, which she spent freely on Tyler, buying him every new gadget, every expensive pair of sneakers, every item he demanded because saying no felt too much like conflict and conflict felt too much like the failed marriage she was still processing. Tyler's world operated with zero accountability. When he talked back to teachers, Jennifer defended him and blamed the school system. And when he was suspended multiple times in a short period, she complained that schools didn't understand creative kids. When neighbors raised concerns about his behavior, she dismissed them as overly sensitive and told Tyler to ignore the haters, using the same language he used about his TikTok comments. She had already paid thousands of dollars to different neighbors over recent months to make problems disappear, to keep Tyler from facing any legal consequences, to preserve the illusion that her parenting approach was working. It was not working. Tyler was growing more entitled, more aggressive, and more convinced that his social media followers made him important, that adults were obstacles to be mocked, and that consequences were things that happened to other people. The person who would finally change everything was 72-year-old Eleanor Rodriguez, a retired teacher who lived next door to the Masons and had spent decades cultivating a garden that was her pride, her joy, and a living memorial to her late husband. Eleanor Rodriguez represented everything beautiful about patience, dedication, and love that transcends death. Her garden was not merely a collection of plants. It was a living museum of her long marriage to Eduardo Rodriguez, who had passed away from cancer years earlier. Eduardo had planted the first rose bushes the week they moved into their modest home. In the early years of their marriage, Eduardo worked the soil with his bare hands because they could not yet afford proper gardening tools. Over the decades, that garden grew into something extraordinary, filled with rare varieties he cultivated from cuttings, roses that bloomed in colors most people had never seen, and specimens professional horticulturists offered to buy for thousands of dollars. Eleanor always refused to sell. These were not simply flowers. They were Eduardo's legacy, her daily connection to the man she had loved since she was 17, her reason to rise each morning and care for something that still needed her. Mrs. Rodriguez lived on a fixed income from Eduardo's pension and her modest teacher's retirement, budgeting every penny with care. She drove an old Honda Civic that Eduardo had maintained meticulously before his illness. She clipped coupons, shopped sales, and wore dresses she had owned for decades because they still fit and remained respectable. But her garden received whatever investment it required, from special soil amendments to organic fertilizers and the careful watering systems Eduardo had installed before he became too sick to work outside. She spent hours each morning in that garden, speaking to Eduardo as she pruned, watered, and fertilized, telling him about her day, asking his advice, continuing their conversation even though only she could speak now. Neighbors understood not to disturb Mrs. Rodriguez during those morning hours. They were sacred and inviolable. Tyler Mason had moved in next door when his mother purchased the house during the divorce. At first, the disruption was minor, occasional loud music and typical noise that did not trouble Mrs. Rodriguez greatly. Having taught middle school for decades, she understood that children had energy and made noise. But Tyler's behavior escalated steadily over the months, each incident worse than the last and each boundary crossed more boldly. It began with him deliberately bouncing basketballs against the shared fence during her morning garden time, interrupting her peaceful hours. When she politely asked him to play later in the day, he laughed and increased the frequency. Then came the trash, handfuls of garbage thrown over the fence into her garden beds, forcing her to sift carefully through her plants to remove the contamination. The situation turned truly cruel when Tyler noticed that Mrs. Rodriguez spoke with a slight accent, her first language being Spanish, though she had lived in America for decades and spoke English fluently. He began filming her without permission, mocking her pronunciation and exaggerating her accent in videos. He posted to TikTok with captions ridiculing his a crazy neighbor and asking why old people were so strange. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taught English as a second language for many years and helped countless immigrant children succeed in American schools, found herself mocked for the very accent she had worked so long to soften. She attempted to speak with Jennifer Mason about Tyler's behavior. Jennifer offered vague apologies, promised to speak to him, and took no meaningful action. The videos continued, and the harassment intensified. Then came the morning that changed everything. Mrs. Rodriguez rose early as usual, prepared her coffee, and stepped outside to begin her routine in the garden. What she discovered shattered something inside her that had endured even her husband's death. Her roses, beautiful and irreplaceable, were dead. Irreplaceable, were dead. Not from disease or neglect, but deliberately destroyed. Someone had poured industrial-strength weed killer on every rose bush in her garden. Decades of cultivation, Eduardo's living legacy, years of devotion and care were reduced to blackened stems and withered petals. The damage was deliberate and thorough. Each plant had been given a lethal dose. Mrs. Rodriguez fell to her knees among the dying roses and wept as she had not wept since the morning Eduardo passed away in their bedroom years earlier. She might never have discovered who was responsible if Tyler had not made a mistake born of arrogance. He filmed himself committing the act and posted the video to TikTok with a caption, describing it as a prank on his annoying neighbor and mocking how easy old people were to troll. followed by laughing emojis. The footage showed him climbing the fence at night and systematically poisoning each rose bush, while narrating his actions and laughing about how Mrs. Rodriguez would cry when she found her flowers dead. Tens of thousands of followers watched it, and hundreds responded with laughing reactions and flames. Viewers flooded the post with laughing emojis and praised him for what they called an epic prank. 3 people who knew Mrs. Rodriguez sent her screenshots, stunned by what they had seen. For the first time in her 72 years, she chose to file a lawsuit. Eduardo had always handled conflict through calm conversation and reason, seeking common ground whenever possible. She had lived by that same philosophy throughout decades of teaching challenging students, dealing with difficult parents, and navigating the realities of public education. But this was not something conversation could mend. Tyler had committed a crime, recorded himself doing it, and faced no consequences at home. The police report she filed brought juvenile probation officers into the picture, yet the true accountability would unfold in small claims court, where she sought compensation to replace the destroyed roses and additional damages for the emotional loss of something irreplaceable. She consulted several horticulturists who confirmed that roses of such age and rarity could not truly be replaced, that mature root systems produced blooms new plants could never replicate, and that she was in fact undervaluing her loss. What Mrs. Rodriguez did not realize was that Judge Judy Shainlin's research team had looked far beyond the surface details of the case. When Tyler Mason's name reached her desk, it stirred instincts sharpened by decades as a family court judge in Manhattan handling thousands of cases. She directed her team to examine every aspect of his background, and what they uncovered revealed a troubling pattern of escalating behavior shielded by a mother unwilling to enforce discipline. They discovered prior incidents with neighbors quietly resolved with payments. They reviewed school records documenting suspensions, psychological evaluations recommending intervention, and teacher notes describing increasingly aggressive conduct. They examined his social media history, including videos he believed were deleted, which showed a consistent pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals for online content. Judge Judy spent several nights reviewing the material and entered the courtroom, carrying something she rarely felt anymore after years of witnessing the worst of human behavior. She was genuinely angry. The courtroom hummed with its usual energy as cameras prepared to capture what most assumed would be another routine dispute. Audience members settled into their seats, many longtime viewers who appreciated seeing accountability enforced. Production assistants completed final checks while the bailiff stood ready near the bench. No one realized they were about to witness a moment that would later be cited as a powerful example of consequences catching up with someone who believed himself untouchable. Mrs. Rodriguez entered first, moving carefully with knees worn from years of tending garden soil. She wore her Sunday best, a modest floral dress she had preserved with care for many years. Her daughter accompanied her for support, holding a folder containing photographs of the garden before and after its destruction, printed images of Tyler's video, statements from horticulturists, and old photographs of Eduardo planting the first roses decades earlier. Then Tyler and Jennifer Mason entered, and the atmosphere shifted. Tyler walked in as though he were at a shopping mall, large headphones covering his ears, his phone held at eye level as he scrolled, seemingly unaware of the seriousness of the setting. He did not acknowledge the bailiff, glance at Mrs. Rodriguez, or show any recognition that he stood in a place where respect mattered. Jennifer followed behind in professional attire, her expression tense with the worry of someone who understood the gravity of the situation, yet no longer knew how to manage her son. She repeatedly tried to get him to lower his phone, sit properly, and display some sign of parental authority. Tyler brushed off every attempt, his posture reflecting indifference and a lack of concern about the proceedings or the authority he was about to face. Judge Judy observed their entrance with calm focus, noting every dismissive gesture and every trace of entitlement that had brought him before her. She had watched countless defendants step into her courtroom over the years, but something about this young boy awakened every instinct she had developed about those in need of difficult lessons. The bailiff called the case. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Judy leaned forward slightly in her chair, a faint smile at the corners of her mouth that seasoned viewers recognized as the calm before a storm. Within moments of observation, she had formed her assessment, and now she was prepared to dismantle the facade of a child who believed social media popularity made him untouchable. She opened the proceedings with razor-sharp focus, her voice precise and cutting as she addressed the plaintiff and summarized the damages being sought. Her tone was professional, yet carried the sense that she already understood far more than the surface details. Mrs. Rodriguez began her testimony through visible emotion, her voice breaking as she described the garden planted decades earlier and explained how the roses symbolized her entire married life. She spoke of spending each morning tending the plants and speaking to her late husband. Photographs were presented, images of extraordinary blooms followed by pictures of blackened stems and withered petals that revealed deliberate destruction. When Tyler's video was played in the courtroom, an audible reaction moved through the audience as they watched him narrate the poisoning of an elderly woman's treasured garden while laughing about how she would cry. Throughout the testimony, Tyler remained slouched, one earbud still in place, his phone resting low on his lap where he assumed it could not be seen. His expression showed no remorse or recognition of harm. He rolled his eyes when Mrs. Rodriguez became emotional and sighed loudly as she described her husband planting each bush by hand. At one point, he muttered a dismissive remark that suggested she was being dramatic when she explained that some of the plants could never be replaced. Jennifer repeatedly nudged him, whispering urgently for him to sit properly and show respect, asking him to behave for a short time. He brushed off each attempt, signaling indifference toward both his mother's authority and the seriousness of the moment. Judge Judy addressed him directly with a calm tone that carried unmistakable warning. She instructed him to put the phone away. Tyler responded with an exaggerated sigh before slowly placing it in his pocket in a manner that conveyed reluctant compliance rather than respect. He removed one earbud but left the other hanging loosely, a subtle gesture that suggested he would follow instructions only halfway. Judge Judy noted the behavior without raising her voice, adding it to her growing assessment. Jennifer then began her defense, describing Tyler as a fundamentally good child who had made a mistake. She suggested the value of the roses was being overstated, characterizing them as replaceable plants. She argued that he did not fully understand the significance of his actions and that children today operated in a different social environment. She stated she had disciplined him privately and believed the matter could be resolved without significant financial consequences. Each explanation underscored a pattern of minimizing responsibility. Judge Judy responded firmly. She stated that children of his age understand the difference between right and wrong, that they comprehend the harm of destroying property and intentionally causing pain. She emphasized that this was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate one, recorded and shared publicly with laughter at the expectation of an elderly woman's tears. This was not harmless mischief, she concluded, but cruelty performed for entertainment. Judge Judy then turned her full attention to Tyler, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. She instructed him to look at her when she was speaking. He slowly lifted his eyes from his lap, where his hand had drifted back toward his phone, and met her gaze with an expression of boredom mixed with irritation, as though the proceedings were simply an inconvenience. She asked him whether he understood that what he had done was wrong. And his reply came casually and without hesitation. He said they were just flowers and could be replaced, that it was not serious. A wave of shock moved through the room. Jennifer closed her eyes in visible distress. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter squeezed her mother's hand as tears formed. Judge Judy's expression hardened, her voice lowering as she repeated his words and emphasized the gravity of destroying something irreplaceable. Tyler, emboldened by years without meaningful consequences, shrugged and made a dismissive comment about older people being dramatic. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. Judge Judy rose from her chair, a rare gesture that signaled the seriousness of the moment. Her movements were measured and deliberate, and when she spoke, her voice was calm in a way that commanded absolute attention. She asked him to repeat what he had said. Misreading the gravity of the situation, Tyler repeated himself and added another remark meant to belittle her, even smirking slightly, as though expecting approval from an unseen audience. Judge Judy responded with controlled intensity. But she told him she understood that he was young and already heading down a troubling path, that he had not been taught properly that actions carry consequences. She said that social media attention does not equal importance and that online audiences are fleeting. She paused before continuing, explaining that he was not exceptional for behaving cruelly and that his conduct would not be tolerated in her courtroom. She described his actions plainly. He had deliberately destroyed something precious, mocked an elderly woman, and shown no remorse or empathy. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by visible unease. Judge Judy then revealed the information uncovered about his prior behavior, including previous incidents quietly resolved, money spent to avoid consequences, school records reflecting escalating problems, and professional recommendations for intervention that had gone unaddressed. Each detail made it clear that the pattern extended far beyond a single act. Tyler sat motionless as she explained the significance of the roses, how they had been planted decades earlier, some grown from cuttings tied to family history, and how their monetary value represented only a fraction of their true worth. She then delivered her ruling, awarding Mrs. Rodriguez the full amount she requested, the maximum permitted in that court. She made it clear that accountability would not end with a simple payment. And as she outlined additional consequences, Tyler's composure visibly faltered. He would personally restore Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, completing supervised work hours across consecutive Saturdays under the oversight of a court-appointed mediator. No phone would be permitted during this service. He was required to write a formal handwritten apology without digital assistance. His TikTok account would be permanently deleted, with every video involving Mrs. Rodriguez removed immediately. He would be prohibited from all social media for an extended period, with court monitoring to ensure compliance. Jennifer would be responsible for enforcing these restrictions or risk facing contempt charges herself. The consequences were carefully designed to strike at the center of Tyler's identity, removing the online validation he depended on and compelling him to confront directly the harm he had caused. Tyler's reaction was immediate. Tears streamed down his face as he protested that it was unfair, insisting that his account and followers mattered. The irony was unmistakable. The first genuine emotion he displayed centered on losing social media access rather than acknowledging the pain he had inflicted. Jennifer broke down as well, admitting through sobs that she had wanted her son's approval and had struggled to impose discipline. Judge Judy responded firmly but with measured clarity, stating that a child requires guidance, not friendship, and that the pattern of enabling behavior would end. When Tyler attempted one final protest, claiming she did not understand, she silenced him with decisive authority and reminded him that the real world does not operate on followers' excuses or attitude. He would spend the required hours rebuilding what he had destroyed and perhaps learn that respect is earned by offering it first. She dismissed the case and ordered them out. The silence that followed was deep and complete before the audience rose in applause. Tyler left the courtroom beside his mother, visibly humbled. The footage spread rapidly, becoming one of the most widely viewed moments associated with the show. Yet the lasting impact unfolded during the weeks that followed, as Tyler worked in Mrs. Rodriguez's garden under supervision. Over time, the labor shifted from punishment to understanding. He began to grasp that actions carry consequences and that people possess value beyond online attention. By the final Saturday, he was asking Mrs. Rodriguez to teach him Spanish while learning about roses and cultivation. An unexpected bond formed between a boy learning empathy and a woman who believed that with patience, structure, and accountability, even deeply misguided children could change.